And now it's got quite serious. I mean, there's burning of, seems to be almost targeting of South African companies. Some suggestion that's because they don't feel South Africa is doing what it should to rein in the Swazi government.
The Kingdom of eSwatini, also known as Swaziland, is currently being rocked by violent protests. What does this mean for the stability of one of the last absolute monarchies remaining in the world? Well, joining me to discuss is Peter Fabricius. He's a journalist focused on foreign affairs. Peter, welcome to the Center for Risk Analysis. Could you tell our viewers what is happening in eSwatini?
Yeah, so it seems that this current spate of protests, I mean, there have been protests in the past, began with the death of a law student in custody in May. And as I understand it, although communications have not been great, that seemed to trigger a series of fairly low-level protests. And then what happened is that some opposition MPs, I call them that, although opposition doesn't exist technically in Swaziland, but they're kind of pro-democracy, even though they don't belong to any party, and they demanded that the prime minister should be basically elected. So I guess it was a kind of a call for resignation of the acting prime minister. And people started to deliver petitions to their MPs, which they do, allowed to do. That's a kind of the closest thing they got to democracy in eSwatini through their Tunkundla system. And when they started delivering them to the Tunkundla in Sipho Fanani, which is a kind of rural area, which is the constituency of this opposition guy, Simelane, the government apparently prevented that happening. So he says, there was dispersing crowds and so on. And that seemed to have triggered the violence, seemed to have turned the protest from peaceful to violent. And then from there it spread to towns all over, to Mbabane, to Manzini, to Mapasa, and so on. So that, as I understand it, was the sequence of events. And now it's got quite serious. I mean, there's burning of, seems to be almost targeting of South African companies. Some suggestion that's because they don't feel South Africa is doing what it should to rein in the Swazi government.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
Do you think that this represents a significant threat to the monarchy and the existing political establishment in eSwatini?
I'm beginning to think so. I didn't at the beginning. This sort of came to everyone's attention, the wider attention, when the SABC reported on Monday that Mswati had fled the country. I don't think he's fled the country, but I don't think he will. But who knows? I mean, what certainly seems to be clear is that there's enough of a threat for him to feel that he should unleash the security forces in what seems to have been a brutal crackdown. I mean, according to Podema, an opposition party, banned opposition party, and that was a few hours ago. There were 40 dead, some 150 or so injured by police or army bullets. Many missing, people arrested, and nobody knows for sure because the internet seems to have been closed down by the government. So, yeah, I mean, I can't really predict whether it'll spin completely out of control, but it's looking more dangerous, I think, than it has been for Mswati. There were protests in '97 that were quite bad, but my gut feeling is that this is worse.
Peter, you spoke about the commercial and other linkages that South Africa has with eSwatini. What about the diplomatic relationship between the two countries?
Yeah, South Africa is normally pretty quiet about these things, but it may be unusual that this morning the Department of International Relations actually issued a statement, and there was implicit criticism of the Swazi government. It was even-handed, which is what these statements are always like. It was calling on the protesters to protest peacefully, but also calling on the government, to respond in a more measured fashion. And the ANC, which is always ahead of the government, especially on these issues of democracy and so on in the region, was much more explicit. You know, Lindiwe Zulu, who's the chair of the International Relations Subcommittee of the NEC, was criticizing the government for its crackdown, calling for a much more measured response, less autocratic government, and calling for SADC to, Southern African Development Community to intervene, which has also been the call of the opposition in eSwatini. So I think these protests are bothering. Obviously, they're rattling Pretoria more than than protests in the past.
Peter, could you give us an idea of the history of Swaziland? Why is the absolute monarchy been so durable? Why have democratic processes failed to take root there?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I mean, to some degree, it's because people tend to cling to power as long as they can. I think there's a component in this, though, of the fact that I think quite a lot of Swazi people are monarchists, and especially in the rural areas. Now, nobody knows. I don't know. No one's ever done a survey, to the best of my knowledge, to test the support for the monarchy. But I think that is what sustains the king. What's starting to happen now, I do believe, though, is that he's overplayed his hand. He's overplayed that hand. I mean, what I've been hearing, that especially in the context of COVID and the lockdowns and economic downturn and general suffering of the people, the conspicuous wealth that the royal family displays quite grossly, really, is starting to really get to Swazi people. And I think the king may have overplayed his hand in relying on support for the monarchy. What clearly I would guess that most Swazis at the moment would prefer a constitutional monarchy, but that's not something which the king is very likely to concede in a hurry.
Peter Fabricius, thank you very much for joining us on the Center for Risk Analysis channel. If you enjoyed this content, please do leave a like and also comment below. How do you see the events in Swaziland playing out over the next few days and weeks? My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Until next time, take care.